Okay, today's lesson, we're going to discuss sports and socialization. So the people who play these sports and what ends up happening to them as they're socialized. So today's lesson, we're going to discuss the process of what it takes to become involved and stay involved in sports. We're going to figure out what happens when someone changes or ends sports participation, and then look at the impact that sport has on community and cultural processes. Socialization simply is just how we learn and develop socially as you're interacting with other people. You know, where you are right now in your dorm room, your apartment, your college, classes you take, that's a social world. So socialization occurs as you become familiar within that social world. And we live in many different social worlds throughout life. So research on social worlds. A social world is the way of life that revolves around that sport and the people that are involved within that sport. You can understand sports experiences and the people that are being involved there when you place the context of that sport within the social world. You could pick one sport, and depending on the context of the social world, that sport can be played differently, can be, the focus of that sport is completely different. We need to understand that just because your social world views the sport experience one way doesn't always transfer to someone else's social world and the context that they relate that sport experience to. So research, the research that's most informative on what happens in sports, it deals with the everyday experiences of people, the social worlds that are created within teams, within towns, within states, countries, the social worlds that revolve around there. And then what community and cultural processes are being involved with these ideologies. Depending on the community, the culture, what ideology do they establish with the sport and how they change? Those that are involved in sport participation, these are some factors that impact that. How can they connect the sport with other interests and goals in their life? Maybe they participate in sport because they have a skill and they're pretty good at it. They want to gain that recognition from others. And depending on the cultural context, the social world you live in, making a certain sports team might hold a lot of importance in that social world. Having been a teacher in a very low socioeconomic community, the young men, when they not only made a football team or a basketball team, but then they excelled, the importance to them in that social world was tremendous. And then, depending on the memories you have of your experiences with physical activity or sport, if they were good memories, you're going to continue participation and enjoy that. If they were negative experiences, well, then the opposite will be true. The process of becoming an elite athlete, the process of becoming elite at anything, I think this two-step process kind of lays it out pretty good. Most people who attempt and try sports, they're involved with number one. They're introduced to a sport, they become involved in it. Maybe they try many, and then you start seeing potential for success as an athlete, or you're being told by coaches, other people from the outside, that, hey, if you continue this, you might be able to earn a college scholarship. You might be able to earn a professional contract. So that leads you into developing a commitment. And you relate your personal reputation. Everything you do, you're identified as an athlete. And we're going to talk about that more in the next couple of slides. That social recognition, or you recognizing that, hey, I am having some success, it spurs a deeper commitment to pursuing becoming an elite athlete. And it takes a commitment to be elite at anything, but especially an athlete that is pretty demanding. So there are some factors related to socialization in sports related to participation availability. The first one is structural. So, what type of sports facilities are in your community? Are you able to access? That's going to determine a lot of, what sport opportunities you have. What type of financial support are you? Do you have the capability to go to camps in the summers? Can you join travel teams? A lot of these things, these structural factors, determine in different social worlds, social contexts, what sports can be offered. Some cultural factors, it gets to that importance. How important is that sport to that athlete's social world? If it's important, well, then they're going to want to be a part of it. If not, they're not going to pursue a sport. Age, gender, race, ethnicity, what things within the social world related to those factors give meaning to being an athlete? That's going to be of importance. So why do young athletes quit, even when they're experiencing great success? I'm sure I'm talking to many of you who've experienced what I'm about to talk about. I myself did. I experienced a lot of success as a high school basketball and baseball player, and I experienced burnout. And although I had opportunities to play at the next level, that last point, that loss of fun, I had no fun. And I've talked to many students who've taken this course in the past, and they speak of the same thing. You start to lose control over your life. You're identified with just that sport, and the stress with that. Some people perform well under that stress, and some people just, it leads to a loss of fun, and they burn out, and they quit participating and end that sport. So what can be done to prevent this? There needs to be a reorganization of sports programs. At the high school level, it's going to be tough to take away that competitive nature. But if we can go to the youth sport and give young athletes more control over their experiences, I think that could be key with burnout. There's going to be a point where competition is important and valuable to developing in the sport. But a young athlete should still have more control over what they're doing in their lives. If not, a number of them will experience burnout. So a question that comes up a lot in this course, when you talk, as a parent, I hear other parents talking about, I want my child to play sports because it builds character. But you have to take a step back. Think about your experience in this class and other classes. You're sitting with, 20, 30, 100 other students hearing the same information, but your experience is going to be different than the person sitting next to you. So we can't generalize it. And the same goes for sports. We can't just say sports build character, because it might for one person, but not for another. But there has been research, and it says that positive socialization can occur if you're able to explore and develop an identity away from that sport. You're able to expand your knowledge outside of the sport. You have relationships with your teammates and people within the sport, but you also are able to develop these connections, relationships outside of sports too. That's very, very valuable. And then you need to be allowed to develop an opportunity of competence in a non-sport activity. And this can be done with mentors, people outside of sports who advocate for you or for the athlete as something other than an athlete, a musician, an academic, whatever it may be, but there needs to be opportunity to grow outside of the sport. Sport and health. Oh, I want my child to play sports, or I want to play sports because it will give me this opportunity for health. I taught a basketball course in the summer, and the majority of students here said that to me. I just want to do this to get a little bit of health. Well, the International Organization for Sport for Development and Peace states there's a well-established direct positive relationship between physical health and physical activity. But if you see that next point, that statement is worded very well because it says physical activity, not sports. The research tells us that the injury risk that's associated with competitive sports It creates more health costs than benefit. So when we say sports, the physical activity, there is a positive relationship with physical health, but sports not so much because of all the injury risks involved. And that's key to understand. This was a very, very interesting research project that was done. The book explains this project. It's called Backboards and Blackboards. And it was a longitudinal study, so it lasted, you see here, 10 years. They studied high-profile college basketball teams. And they were looking at how do these young men, how do they perceive themselves within the sport, outside of sport? And what they found were these athletes, obviously, they're at a high-level Division I college basketball program. They are engulfed in that role as being a basketball player. And as they became more involved within that team, that role, they were engulfed. That relationship, it intensified. They identified themselves related to basketball. How they set their goals and how they viewed the rest of the world was based on what they were learning in basketball. So they set goals, they focused on tasks, sacrifice for success in basketball. That's what everything revolved around, was their basketball. And you see here, the lessons were not applied to other aspects of their life. So as a student, they were unable to focus on specific tasks or set those goals in the classroom or relationships outside of basketball. So that transfer of learning did not occur. They remained in their basketball life. You know, I didn't play college sports, so I can't speak to this. But having taught this course for many semesters, I've heard this from athletes in different sports. But I definitely see, you know, being at the university, that they are able to take some of this and do very good work in the classroom. Okay, this is an interesting fact too. There can be multiple and contradictory meanings in communities. So they did research. Someone did research on Michael Jordan from '82 to '95, and in these different settings, you can see the different meanings that were given. In the United States, Michael Jordan's persona was connected with capitalism and traditional family values, which is interesting because if you know anything about Michael Jordan's history, he doesn't really uphold traditional family values too well. The Black Britons, they saw Jordan as representing black empowerment and resistance to white supremacy. In New Zealand, it represented the NBA, American pop culture, and the prowess of African Americans. And in Poland, it was the American dream, freedom, independence, a self-made man, an opportunity. And those beliefs represented opposition to communism that the Poles had recently rejected in their lives. So in these multiple contexts, Michael Jordan was viewed in so many different ways. And we need to be cognizant of that as we take our own experiences, but we look to others' experiences in sport. Okay, we have to realize research has shown that none of us lives outside the influence of ideology. This whole course is going to revolve around the main ideologies, and we're going to look at how the connection with sports and sports experiences reproduce these dominant forms, but they can also challenge and transform these, and that's what we eventually like to do. We're going to see how ideologies have been transformed throughout sport. So, to wrap things up, what we've learned about the process of what it takes to become involved in a sport, stay involved in a sport, avoid burnout, and then how interactions with others in our social world are going to give us meaning in that sport. What happens when we change or end sport participation, some of those influences, and then we discussed the impact of being involved in sports. What does it do to a person? Or the case of the basketball players, what it does not do. There was no transfer of learning. So this is a good starting point with sport and socialization, and we will continue the discussion. Thanks for watching.